This one goes out to you and yours. Worldwide, I say, hey, I'll be gone today, but I'll be back from around the way. Seems like everywhere I go, the more I see, the less I know. But I know one thing, that I love you.
Introduce and acknowledge our keynote speaker, Dr. Felix Kwame-Yeboah, a professor in international development from Michigan State University. I'd also like to welcome Panapa's advisor, Dr. Antonio Lorisola. Panapa is a student-run organization for graduate students here at Penn State, and we seek to foster the connection between Africa and the diaspora. To achieve that, we hold several events, including an annual conference. And today, for the 5th annual conference, our theme is Community Development Initiative in Africa. So today you'll be learning what words such as community and development means for Africa through keynote speeches, guest speeches, panel discussions, and research presentations. Finally, we'll be officially launching the Panapa Give Back to Africa Fund, a first for Panapa, where we'll be showcasing the impact we have made through engaging and collaborating with local communities and organizations in Africa by implementing grassroots solutions to solve critical issues faced by our people. Some of these issues include youth empowerment with special focus on female education, healthcare, food insecurity. So I encourage everyone today to have an open mind, keep your African spirits high, and let's have a great conference. Thank you.
So we're going to begin the oral sessions, but before we begin, we have a short presentation from Nadir Muntaka, who's going to be talking about an initiative for Panapa alumni. So I think this information will be very interesting for all of us, and we hope that those of you who are in Panapa will be inspired to join this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all of you coming here. I'm really excited to be here, and we started IPA, which is Panapa, which all of you are in today, years ago. And today we are planning on starting a new initiative, a group network, a network that would, in a way, look like Pan-APA, but beyond Pan-APA. Okay. Our new organizations, we started with as Ruth, myself, Sixtus, Vier, and Leslie and Sarah came up with the planning. Now we are currently in the planning stage of this initiative. And the name of the organization is Pan-African Network and Alliance. Okay. Everybody is invited. We are recruiting the graduating students, PhD students, to join us. Okay. You do not have to be a professional like we have it in Pan-APA, Pan-African Professional Alliance. You don't have to be a professional to be part of our group. This is very open and broad. You don't have to graduate from Penn State to be part of the group. Wherever you graduate from, wherever you are from, whatever profession you have, whatever interests you have, you can join us. And the idea is to just ensure that we provide resources for graduating Africans and the diaspora to achieve their goal. If you're looking for a job, we would serve to navigate through the process to help you find the resources. And just going to skip this. So we're going to start with the group here in the United States and help each other. It's a network group, support group that would help each other to achieve our goals. And go beyond the diaspora and to Africa to help people, either they're looking for going to school or getting some sort of a business to we will be in a process, in a position to help people to look at that. Right. And as I said earlier, we are in the process, in the planning process now, and we will be having a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and media person and advisory board. So, if you are interested, please let me know, and I will be happy to include you in this group. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. Questions? All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to listen to Mutaka speak about this initiative. So we hope that some of you will reach out and try to get involved in this. So now at this time, without further ado, we're going to begin the oral presentation. So we have 3 exciting presentations here for you today. So this is an opportunity to learn about the research that some of our members are conducting. And we hope that this will be informative, we hope that this will be interesting, and we hope that you can provide them with questions that will help them to further their inquiry. So our presenters in order of presentation is going to be Christelle Zongo, she is our treasurer, and she is in the Department of Economics here at Penn State. Then we're going to have Eden Yemesegan, and she is in the Department of Architectural Engineering. And last but not least, we're going to have Lorene Uma, and she is in the Department of Architectural Engineering as well. So without any further delays, I'm going to invite Christelle to come up and give her presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christelle. I'm a third-year PhD student in the Department of Economics. And today I'm going to present my project, hopefully in 15 minutes. The title of my paper is Education Policy and Intergenerational Educational Persistence, Evidence from Rural Benin. So before I get started, I want to give a clarification of a couple of concepts that whose definition might not be straightforward for people who are not education economics. So the first one is intergenerational educational persistence. So what that means basically is just the strong association between parents' education and the education attainment of the adult children. And another concept that I will be using throughout this presentation are upward mobility and downward mobility. So upward mobility basically just means that children are doing better than their parents. And when it applies to education, it just means that children are doing better than their parents in terms of education on average. So to get into the introduction and motivation to this paper, we know that there are a couple of factors that influence parents' decision to enroll their child in school. And among those factors, we have the expected return and the intrinsic value for education, but also the opportunity cost of sending the child to school. And as it has been proven by previous research, low-income parents tend to invest less in the education of their children. And that's not just because of the financial constraint, but it's because they happen to have low expected return for education, but high opportunity costs. Similarly, when we look at the literature on intergenerational mobility, the threshold for downward mobility is lower for students from less educated families. So take, for example, a child from a family where the parents only have 1 year of education. For that child to be classified in the category of downward mobility, he needs to have no education at all, as opposed to another child that is from a family where the parents have some college degree. So that other child will be in the downward mobility even if he has graduated high school or has no college degree. So the motivation of my child will do better than me. That threshold is smaller when the parents are not educated. So because of that, then Students from educated or high-income family, they are more prepared to take advantage of new opportunities offered by education policy. So in such an environment, education program will rather increase inequality of educational opportunities than decrease it as we would prefer. But this whole analysis that led to these conclusions relies upon the so-called maximally maintained inequality hypothesis. And what that hypothesis claimed basically is that for education policy or education expansion to lead to a decrease in qualitative inequality, it has to be that enrollment rate from the most advantaged group is approaching saturation point. So if we take it in the other direction, as long as we have advantaged group, say educated parents that still need some incentive to enroll their child in school, when there is education policy, they are the one who will first benefit from it, and that will end up increasing inequality overall. So we have like two conceivable possibilities. Education policy can lead to an increase in the inequality of educational opportunity or 80%. So what I'm going to do in this paper is empirically test this maximally maintained inequality in a given context with a particular policy. So before I get into the objective hypothesis of this paper, I want to talk a little bit about the education system in Benin and how the pre-elementary education happened. And that will lead to the particular policy I focus on in this paper. So the first legal or official mention of education, free elementary education, was in the 1990 Constitution of Benin, where it states that the government should provide free public education to everyone, and that elementary education was compulsory. But there was like no action taken, for example, to enforce the compulsory part. It was not as if when parents don't enroll the child in school, there was some action taken against them. So it wasn't until 2003 that the government decided that girls enrolled in public school in rural areas will no longer be paying any tuition fees or subscription payment. And later on in 2006, the decision was extended to the whole country. So in this paper, I will focus only on the 2003 decision concerning girls in rural areas. So the objective of this paper is to use some data from the 2013 population and habitation census, a representative sample of 10%, to analyze how this policy of waive of tuition fees payment will impact parents' decision to enroll their daughter in school, and how this effect will change across family groups. Why I classify households based on household wealth index that I constructed and the education of the head of the household. So I will get back to this slide first, after I present the result. So in terms of the contribution of this paper, it contributes to two strands of literature. The first one is the broad literature on impact evaluation of education program in developing countries. Result lies with those found in previous paper. And the second branch of literature is the intergenerational mobility in terms of human capital formation in educational activity. So, as I mentioned before, the data that I use in this paper is from the 2013 population and habitation census in Benin, and the data is available on the IPU's website. So that data gives information on at household level for about 180,000 households and individual in those households at the time of the census. So there's this variable in the data that give the relation between each individual to the head of the household. So if for a given person, I have for that specific variable that he or she is the child, it's the biological child of the head of the household, and I can link this father-child relationship between them. So I was able to do that, and in the end, I constructed a sample of children and one of their parents. So I have the father if the head of the household is a man, and the mother if the head of the household is a woman. So another thing that I did is that I construct a wealth index that I will use later as measure for wealth and income, using the factor component analysis procedure. So at the end, I get a key variables for the parents, including their education level, the number, gender, and ages of their children, and their religion and ethnicity. For children, I have the identity of one of their parents. It can be the mother or the father with the previous variables for them. And I have their age, their gender, and the educational attainment in 2013. So this is just a procedure for constructing the wealth index that I won't go through because of time. So let me just go through this slide. This is an important slide because it's after I use information or conclusion from this slide in my methodological section. So I want to show two things from this slide, which is the histogram of primary school education attainment. To the left, for a subsample of daughters in rural areas, and to the right, for subsample of the head of the household they come from. So two things we can see from this graph is that they peak at 0 for the daughter subgroup. The subgroup of daughters is smaller compared to the peak at 0 for the subgroup of the head of the household. And in the opposite direction, the peak at larger or equal to 6 is higher for the daughters. So what that basically is saying is that we do have some upward mobility. It's kind of a signal for upward mobility. And the second thing that I want to show from this graph is the flatness in between, which is basically implying that we don't have much dropout, that once you enroll in primary one, you at least finish primary school. So it's like enrolling and finishing at least primary school are kind of substitutes. So that specific variable that will be my outcome variable is better represented as a dummy variable, an indicator variable, rather than a discrete variable as we can see here. And that's what I will be using from now on. This is also really important graph that I use to explain some of my results. So in this graph, we have the education of children as a function of the education of their parents. So the first panel of the graph is for the subsample of educated parents. And as we can see, almost two-thirds of them have non-educated children. But when we look at the second panel for educated parents, we have about 3/4 of them with educated children. So what that is saying, we still have two things from this graph as well. The first one is that we have some intergenerational educational persistence, in the sense that when your parents are educated, you're more likely to end up educated, and when they are not educated, you're more likely to also end up non-educated. The second thing is the 3/4 that we have, which is pretty high. It's not close to 0, but I will use this in the sense of approaching saturation point. Remember, in that maximally maintained inequality hypothesis. Yeah. So for the methodology, I use a difference in difference methodology. So for that, I will need a treatment group and a control group, and the before treatment observation and after treatment observation. So I consider the household as the unit of observation, because what I'm looking at is the education decision of parents. So they are making the decision for their children, and then I'm observing that decision multiple times because I'm observing the education attainment of multiple children in a given household. So with that information, I'm able to classify children according to the age into pre-treatment observation and post-treatment observation. So using information from previous papers and age range, like right age range to be enrolled in school in Benin, I have that children between 13 and 18 years old in 2013 are post-treatment observation, because they were between 3 and 8 years old in 2003, so they were in the age range to be enrolled in primary one when the policy happened. But those between 9 and 18 years old, in 2003, they were too old to be enrolled in primary one when the policy happened. So I consider those as pre-treatment observation. So for treatment group and control group, the treatment group is obviously parents with daughters because the policy was about daughters. The control group, I had a choice between household with sons in rural areas or just household in urban areas. But using some placebo analysis, I find out, it turns out that household with sons in rural areas are better control for household with daughters in rural areas. So that's what I use for control group. So as I was saying, the methodology is a difference in difference, but because my outcome variable is non-linear, I have to use the non-linear difference in difference. So the treatment effect is that expression in equation 1, and the estimate for it is in the last equation on the page. This part is just for the inference part that I won't go through because of time. So I have the estimation result. This graph B is the most important here because what I want to show is the differential effect between a household with educated head of household and household with non-educated head of household. So the blue one is for household with non-educated head of household, and the red one is for household with educated head of household. So we see this dominance between the two graphs, which is basically saying that household with non-educated head of household uniformly have higher treatment effect, so they respond more to the treatment. So my explanation to this is that, remember that graph we saw in the beginning where we have almost 3/4 of educated parents already educating their children before the treatment happened. So that's my explanation for it, because that is kind of saying that those advantage group, this advantage group is already reaching saturation point in terms of enrollment rate. That's why we are observing non-educated parents responding more to this particular policy. So this is pretty much saying the same thing with the density plot instead of the CDF. So this is the inference part, because we have seen a bunch of treatment effect for each household in the treatment group, but some of them might not be statistically different from 0. We have seen some of them actually being negative, and that's kind of worrying, like how come the treatment will have negative effect. So what this graph is showing us here, the blue, everything below the blue line are the ones that are statistically different from 0. So all those negative values that we have been seeing here, none of them is statistically different from 0. So it's like the treatment just didn't have any effect on those people at all, rather than having negative effect. So this is the placebo part to show that the household with boys or household with sons in rural area are actually a good control group for those, because here I consider only pre-treatment observation. I tried to do the same thing in expecting that I won't observe any treatment effect because there was no treatment. And so if there is no difference between the two groups, if I do the analysis, I shouldn't be able to observe any treatment effect or any difference between them. And that's exactly what I have here. So all the coefficients are statistically equal to 0. So now what I did next is to constrain my sample such that I have the opposite structure from the maximally maintained inequality hypothesis. So here I constrain my sample so I have people who have at least one child, one non-educated child in the pre-treatment cohort. And by doing that, then we can see here that even the educated parents, a lot of them have non-educated children. So the approaching saturation point does not hold anymore. So after that, I redo the same thing, and now we can see educated parents uniformly benefit more from the policy. So this kind of confirmed the maximally maintained inequality hypothesis in both directions. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my
Hello everyone. I'm I'm sorry, I think the updated one couldn't be open, so the date is wrong in here. I apologize for that, but welcome again to Panapa. I'm sure you guys are excited, and we had a great presentation from Kristen. Thank you so much, and I hope you're going to enjoy my presentation too, because I'm going to help you go through African traditional construction. And my name is Aiden. I am a PhD student in Architectural Engineering Department. Well, my title is Learning from Historical Building Construction in Africa and Adapted for Sustainable and Green 3D Printing Technology. Before I before I start my presentation, I want to thank people in my life who played a big role for me to be here. My parents, my friends, my families, my teachers. These are actually my primary and high school teachers. So I really want to thank all this community because of them I'm right here. I'm 26 years old, I'm an Ethiopian, and I'm specializing in 3D printing of infrastructures. So I'm going to help you go through my introduction, problem statement, traditions of building a house in Africa, sustainable 3D printing construction, and adapting it for houses, 3D printed houses, and then we're going to have a conclusion. Before I start, well, on my updated slide, I had some questions, but I'll just ask you orally. So, what are like the most important things that our African ancestors shared to us about construction? Like, what's the most critical thing that we can learn from our African ancestors about construction? What come in your mind, like?
Strength of the triangle.
Strength?
Strength of the triangle.
Triangle shape. Okay, the geometry of triangle, which is like very good resisting compressive forces. And?
Using readily available materials.
Exactly, available materials. They don't have transportation, you know, and they cannot import materials from other countries. So they actually use local and available materials. And I said handwriting.
I was going to say the same thing as she.
This is available materials, exactly. And also durability. The houses are durable. Actually, there are houses which were like built 100 years ago and they're still there. They do exist. I can at least have a testimony in Ethiopia. So 3D printing technology is currently a very emerging technology, and it's going to be like a very important construction system for the future industry, and also currently has been done a really good job. And ancient African buildings do have a wide range of materials and vernacular structures. So my main goal is to learn those building constructions in Africa and then try to modernize them. So I'll try to modernize the construction techniques, the material they used, and perhaps the geometries, those triangles. Why did they stuck with like a triangle or dome-shaped structure? So I want to learn those skills and then adapt them to a green and sustainable 3D printed houses in tropical and arid regions. I specifically focus on tropical and arid regions because for other regions, like in the US, in some parts of the US, we do have snow. So pretty much in Africa, we don't really consider snow for construction because we don't have one. So I do have 3 questions in my mind when I come up with this research idea. The first one is shortage of affordable houses or crisis of houses. Really do exist in most places in Africa. So how to tackle this problem. The second one is lack of knowledge of the African sustainable historical construction. Neo-engineers really wanted to invent new technology, but then we usually forgot to learn what our fathers, what our mothers have done on the previous construction. So not a lot of people know about African construction, historical construction. So I wanna make it out loud to the community here, and also learn. And also we do have absence of environmentally friendly construction in the current infrastructures. So as Hafa told you, I want to start with like the material. I want to learn what kind of material did they use, and the geometry or the form, the driving parameters. The driving parameters here specifically are like a natural hazards, like flooding, tsunami, and also some other like impacts, like insects and mosquito entrances. Those all factors are really need to be considered during construction and could be one of the challenge, especially in Africa. And also the procedure of construction. There are various construction methods, a modular construction, cast in situ construction, prefabrication, and also the challenges and the remedies. So in terms of material, so what kind of material do you usually see in construction in Africa? I know it's listed here, but pretend I haven't seen it. I'll hide it. So, anything? Clay, bamboo, and what? Adobe?
Raffia?
Raffia.
Yeah.
The straws. Okay. See,
Concrete.
Lots of type of concrete.
lots of concrete. Okay. And fibers. And Sandy?
Sand, the valley answer. Sand. Yes.
Sand, of course. Yeah, of course. All those materials, like the sand, the bamboo, the round earth, the straws, all those are materials used. And so, like specifically the round earth, the clay, the stone, and the bamboo, all those are resisting the compressive load, like a gravity load. Whereas, like the straw, the sticks, the bamboo, the wood, and the wires are used to resist a tensile force. So for currently, like we use, I mean, concrete is a bit modern one, but we use concrete for compressive load, and we use like rebars or reinforcement for like a tensile road resistance. So let's go through like the cob construction. So cob is made of these 5 significant ingredients. The first one is a clay and a straw, sand, lime, and water. So using these 5 ingredients, we make a cob wall. And this cob wall can be used to make a cob wall, attached cob layers, and also this thatched roof is made of the grasses. And the other, so these ingredients do have a very significant importance by themselves. So the clay is used as like a hold things together as a binder, whereas the straw resists tensile force, do have a good tensile strength, and the sand is the main building block of the cob, which is rough, and the water should be plain and fresh, used to mix the lime and putty, and the lime is used as a mortar. And the other is a hemp, which is pretty much not common, but it's common in some parts of Africa. So hempcrete house is made of a hemp, a sand, lime, and water. So they make like a hempcrete. This makes make a hempcrete block. This block can make the wall. They can also be used in a thatched roof as a wall, and hemp is very good in insulation. So usually used for the roofs. Although it doesn't have the good strength as cob. So this ingredient is the hemp is good in tensile strength, just like the straw. The sand is a main building block with rough angles. The water is the mix for the lime putty, and the lime here is also act as a mortar. And the bamboo can be used in different forms, like the half-round bamboo sticks and also a full-round bamboo sticks, as you can see in this picture. So those are like some of the examples I picked in my research, but there are various materials used in construction in Africa. And the geometry in the form, a few of them are the tuluk structure, castle-shaped structure, dome-shaped structure, and elephant-shaped structure. So these are the common ones, but of course there are various shapes used in construction. For example, in Sudanese, they do have such kind of house, which looks like a tuluku, Tunisia, South Africa, Cameroon, Mali, Ethiopia, but also different geometry used in different countries of Africa. So the driving parameters that I care the most are availability of material, is it locally available, and cost of construction, natural hazard, and climatic condition. These are the driving parameters that I consider in my research. And to pick an example of procedure of construction, for example, for Tuluku house, there are like they stand a circular wall to maintain the main frame, and then there are shorings up to the wall, making a frame, and then kind of build like an umbrella connecting the walls, standing from the central pole and strengthening the umbrella using different ties. So like here we use different rebar wires and tying up the wall frame, have the main frame, the structural elements like the beam, the column that we call in here, and finally cover the roofs using different finishing materials like a grass, and also cladding, so we can have a complete Suluku house. So some of the common challenges here are deforestation. So wood is used in most of the construction, which we need to avoid. And in my research, I use a plant residue, low strain, so I use different waterproof materials. For mosquito entry, I build a mosquito-proof house. So pretty much most of you understood what 3D printing and sustainable and green infrastructure, so I'll pass this one. Just to help you go through what 3D printing process is. 3D printing just started like from a drawing. This is like a simple CAD drawing. I use actually Tinkercad, but you can use different softwares like Rhino, Autodesk Fusion, and then you generate an STL file. That STL file can be sliced into a G code, and you can send it to a 3D printer. So I have my actual 3D printed object, just like what you print in a normal plain paper. And in here, in Africa, actually, there was one project in which in Mali, where they 3D printed actually a house. And they recently 3D printed a house, and which is pretty amazing. And they also 3D printed a school, so they've already started the project there. And why 3D printing in Africa? There are various reasons. First, minimal material waste. We're not going to use a formwork for 3D printing construction, so we avoid use of wood. There's fast production. We need houses. We need a lot of houses, and for that, we need to have like a fast production. But in Africa, usually, like at least in Ethiopia, I know like one construction takes for a house it takes like 6 or 7 months, and for a big high-rise building it takes like 3 or 4 years, which we really need to work on it. And improved availability, cost effectiveness, and we can print simple to complex materials. Of course, we do have some challenge like printability, buildability, and quality control. All those are the challenge that we need to consider. I would like to achieve the sustainable development goals with my research because my buildings are going to be green, and also I'm going to have the community be literate. Like, still in Africa, there is a very big a very high illiteracy rate, and by introducing this technology, I'll have the community learn computer and then how to use the computer to 3D print a house. So that's going to be also very important. And so I choose a coal-based, hemp-based, and bamboo-based material. These are the materials I choose, and these are some of the structures I modeled. This is the shape, adaptive shape of Tuluku houses. I optimized this with the base material, and also this is elephant-shaped hood that I modeled with an optimization like this. So, well, my next step is to 3D print and experiment these houses, which is coming soon after the summer. Yeah, so pretty much this is my research, and I would like to have your comments and recommendations in my research. These are the references I used. So I guess I'm on time, and thank you so much for listening.
Presentation. Actually, my research is closely related to yours. I'm building on the natural hazards, the parameters that you described that really affect the buildings in Africa. So I'm trying to look at ways we can enhance the resilience of the low-income housing in Africa using data science approaches. We know that in order to preserve these buildings and to ensure that they're able to withstand the natural disasters such as flooding, earthquakes, and storms, we need information. And I'm proposing to use data science to avail this information using a community-driven approach. My name is Lori Noma. I'm a first-year doctoral student, Department of Architectural Engineering. So I'm going to give a brief outline of what we're going to look at. I'm going to look at the research objectives and the approach and the preliminary findings and the proposed solutions that we want to use to enhance the resilience of these buildings, especially in Africa, to the natural hazards and what we are going to do as part of future work. So to enhance the resilience of these buildings, we need to involve the community. Most of the time, the engineering aspects of the design and implementation and the construction, they are based on engineering heavy perspectives and approaches. We want to build on a system where we engage the community. We learn from what they have been doing to enhance their resilience, not just using a top-down approach that most of the time, most of the solutions end up in the pilot stage. So that is why we propose the community-driven approach. This is a stakeholder engagement workshop that our research team conducted in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to be able to capture the requirements of those low-income communities in order to use their proposals and what they have been doing to combine it with the engineering aspects in order to improve the resilience of the housing. So just an approach. First, we did a disaster risk knowledge analysis. We looked at the state-of-the-art practice in the data science aspect that have been used to capture information that will be useful for engaging the communities and trying to find ways of improving their practices in response to natural disasters. So these technologies that we identified are like artificial intelligence, drone imaging, machine learning, and data mining to be able to forecast and detect the underlying vulnerabilities from natural disasters. Once we obtain this information using the data science technology, we can disseminate it to the people through early warning system and a structured disaster risk communication to enhance their preparedness, to facilitate the planning for the natural disasters and to build up better recovery. So after enhancing the preparedness, we will evaluate and monitor the whole system and how it's functioning and repeat the process, iterate the process to keep improving on the disaster response and planning. So just as a brief background of where this is coming from, we have all seen that natural disasters has presented extreme weather events that are affecting our buildings, not only in the global south, but also here in the global north. And 44% of these natural disasters are directly linked to floods. For example, in summer last year alone, property worth $82 billion was damaged. This shows that flooding is really an issue. And when you consider that in the global south, the ability to respond to, plan for how they will respond to the natural disaster is low because of their low economic capability. So we want to find ways of providing them with information beforehand so that they can know what to do, not only in their buildings, but also as a preparatory measure to respond to the natural disaster. So the climate change crisis has intersected with several existing factors, such as the location of some of the urban areas that make them susceptible to flooding and increase their vulnerabilities. And if you look at the statistics, 29% of the entire population of the world live in flood-prone areas. So this means that we are more likely to be affected by floods than we think. And also by 2050, more than 1 billion people will be exposed to flooding. When you look at the context of Africa, 70% of the total African population live in informal settlements. And these are the houses which are prone to damage when natural disasters occur. And there's also a housing deficit, as Eden had mentioned before. 100 million people are homeless and 60% live in slums. So this means they are more vulnerable to suffer the impacts of flooding. When you consider the case of East Africa, I come from Kenya, so I looked at the case of East Africa. 1.3 million people each year, and more than 500,000 houses are damaged by flooding alone. And also, there's this violent storm, the tropical storm Anna, that occurred in February 2022. It displaced 110,000 people and damaged close to 150,000 housing. This just shows how the flooding issue is a great threat to our housing in Africa. Our preliminary findings show that in the process of managing and trying to reduce the disaster, the underlying risks of disaster, loss and damage, there are multiple stakeholders, and they all rely on information from dispersed sources. Like flooding is something that comes most of the time when people are least prepared. So we need information that is consolidated in one source. But the problem is this information is distributed in different sources. Another problem is, as I had said before, there's more focus on the technology aspect rather than trying to learn from the experiences of the people in order to build their resilience. And there's also limited data, especially in Africa. There's no information to show what is the underlying risks. In the specific communities, they don't know the underlying risks that may come from a disaster in case it occurs, so they are not able to prepare well for it. So this is the approach that we are proposing. We have actually partnered with stakeholders in Tanzania as the universities, and through their local networks, we are trying to engage the local community to help them to capture their vulnerabilities and map the underlying risks. Once we have this information, we are able to analyze the information and try to see how we can improve their housing resilience based on their practices and also based on the science and engineering techniques. And the proposed solutions that will be developed, because we engage the community from the beginning, we believe that this will help to scale the uptake of these technologies and the solutions so that they don't end up at the pilot study phase. We have also partnered with We Robotics. We Robotics is a non-profit organization that has flying labs hubs in Africa. And the flying labs, they give drones to the local community and they teach them how to capture drone images. Through these drone images, we will use artificial intelligence to be able to model the community, the housing of the community using building information models. The building information model produce 3D images that enable the non-technical community members to be able to understand what is the risk in my community. In case there is a disaster, which of the infrastructure or the roads will be inaccessible during the flooding and which houses are likely to be damaged. Through the information, they can also identify the areas which are most prone to flooding so that they can try to minimize erecting their structures in those areas. This is also the conceptual architecture of a platform that, through my research, I'm trying to develop. This platform will rely on drone images collected by the local community members, and we will use AI to be able to analyze these drone images to generate the building information models that I've shared before. And also, there's this platform called Ushahidi. Has anyone heard of Ushahidi? It's an African-based platform that has been used even here in the US. It was created in Kenya during post-election violence. It allows the members of the community to capture images and send it to the platform so that they can show there is a certain risk here and enable people to respond. So we will use such a platform to be able to also feed into our building information models to facilitate visualization of the impact of flooding that is taking place in different places. And we will also use data mining to extract data from existing databases on previous disaster. And through this, we want to generate a disaster risk information knowledge warehouse that contains information about the exposure of the built assets, the infrastructure, the building materials that are resistant to the flooding in those areas. And the information will be able to facilitate disaster risk management because, as we said earlier, we need information available in a consolidated place to facilitate faster response and also proactive planning rather than reactive. So anticipated contribution, one of these is the decision support tool that I've explained here. And also through the engagement of the different stakeholders, because now they're all working in silos. They're working alone. There's no information exchange. There's no common place to obtain the information. So we are trying to facilitate collaboration in that disaster risk management process to enhance the implementation of the solutions that are generated each and every time. We also intend to produce youth engagement material through the data that we will have collected, and we'll also find ways of trying to involve the young people in mapping their vulnerabilities, such as what the We Robotics is doing currently in Africa. And as part of future works, we'll also continue engaging the community to help us capture drone images and also capture their requirements based on the vulnerabilities. We also know that historic buildings, most historic buildings, if you've been to the East African coast, there are tourist attractions and buildings which have been left in ruins. We are trying to also use the aspect of drone imaging to be able to capture the historic buildings and also facilitate planning and trying to find ways of restoring the buildings. So I'd want to thank the NSF for funding this project, and also my advisor, who is the lead PI of the ADRELO project, Advancing Resilience in Low-Income Housing, for also guiding me through the process. Thank you.
Amazing things and making contributions that will further development improvement in Africa. So we are so thankful that you are here today. So we are now going to begin the question and answer session. So how we've structured it is we have the presenters first speaking, and then now we will have questions. So you may ask questions for a particular panelist, or you may ask questions for the whole general group. So I will be moderating and I will take questions. So I ask you to please raise your hand and I will call on you, and then you can ask your question. Sir in the back.
Hi, thanks for the great talks. They're really pretty cool. I've got a question about the 3D printing. First of all, well, two questions. First of all, could you just go a little bit deeper in terms of the materials that you're thinking of using for 3D printing? And then secondly, what considerations have you put into scalability?
So would one of you like to answer that question?
All right. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah. So the material that I wanted to use for 3D printing is going to be cope and hemp. I know it's a little bit tricky. I didn't put a sign on that. I'm not going to 3D print a bamboo. I'm going to manually insert the bamboo for the walls. But I'm going to 3D print a cope by mixing the 5 ingredients: the sand, the clay, straw, and lime and water. So I'll try to make it flowable and buildable as much as I can. It will be challenging, but one of my seniors has actually experimented that before I came here and successfully built a wall using a cold mixture. But she has built it until like limited in like feet. So I wanted to improve the strength. So the straws are going to be chopped, like chopped sticks, and the clay is going to be powder, sand powder, and lime powder. So it'll be flowable like concrete. And hemp is also pretty much the same thing. The hemp fibers and the lime, sand, and water. So those 4 ingredients for the hemp. So I'll try to 3D print. So I didn't put further pictures where I've experimented. Now I've started doing the walls using cope at the beginning because it's a little bit heavy. And then when I go up, I use a hemp mixture because it's lightweighted, and we want lightweighted structures on the top and very good in insulation. So I use that for the roofing too. And the bamboos are just going to be inserted manually. But I know there are some universities doing experiment sort of printing bamboo, and I would like to collaborate with them and try to make the research like fully 3D printed house. The scalability will be, so the experiment I'm going to do is going to be half of a normal residential house. I'm going to experiment half of a normal like one-room residential house, but in real life, we can use it for like high-scale residential houses in schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to take a question?
A couple of things. First question is, are you going to build a 3D printer, or is it going to be built by Africans, or is it going to be imported? One. Two, who is going to live in these houses? We know the new generation have a totally different mindset about what is design and what is good. Are you going to be incorporating the modern design with the olden design, or are you just going to stick with one old design as you presented?
Yeah, thank you. Should I continue answering? All right, thank you so much for the question. That's a very crucial question. I ask it myself so many times. So the 3D printer right now I'm using is we bought the 3D printer, my professor and his research team that used that 3D printer for a NASA competition. If you have heard of it, they 3D print like a habitat which can be imitated in Mars. So I'm using like the same robot there. So for my current experiment, I'm not going to build a 3D printer. I have already a built 3D printer, so I'm going to use that. But when I have a successful result, and at the end when I have a stakeholder, I'll definitely go to Africa, and I'm not going to buy a 3D printer because I do have some connections with mechanical engineers where they are able to build the 3D printer by themselves. Actually, I was in Ethiopia like eight months ago, and I met a couple of people where they were able to manufacture the 3D printer by themselves. So I'm going to collaborate with them. In fact, we have shared, me and Segun, we're doing a research about teaching additive manufacturing to the African education of additive manufacturing in Africa. So we make sure that the 3D printer is built by themselves, by the community. So I do have a lot of mechanical and IT engineering students where they can build it for me, and then we use local available materials. So as much as we can, we don't want to import materials. But it's going to be a pilot project, so I'm sure there are going to be a lot of challenges. Who's going to live in it? Definitely. Well, the future goal is for a neighborhood. So I want to 3D print a neighborhood where displaced people, usually for displaced people, where they try to immigrate to the city, but they don't have a place to live, so they live in a slum. For those people, I want to build a neighborhood, some kind of a tiny houses neighborhood. The community might ask whether that house is really feasible or not, and then whether it goes their culture. So I choose a dome-shaped house because it really imitates the culture of Africa. We usually eat in circle. We usually have churches which are in circle. The mosques and the church are in circle. So I want to imitate the circular houses. And of course, for my advantage, where I don't use rebars and reinforcement, so circular shaped or dome-shaped houses are good resisting compressive loads without using a rebar. So I do have two meanings. I'm going to publish a paper very soon, which has all its explanations, but this circular or dome-shaped houses is used for showing unity. So the awareness thing is what comes here. Before we build a house, we have to aware the community what 3D printer is and why we are trying to build their houses using a 3D printer. So before I do the project, definitely our first project of educating people about additive manufacturing is on my priority list. I don't know if I answered my question.
Wonderful. So I see your hand up. Do you have a question for the other presenters? We want to make sure we get to them too.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, great talks. And I'll ask a question for Christelle, and then a general question for the architects. So Christelle, as I understood it, it's compulsory from 2003 for the girls to go to school, up to primary school, right? But then you had a lot of girls that didn't go to school. So is there a penalty for that, or how do they not have to do it?
So in 2000, thank you for the question. In 1990, it was said in the Constitution that it was compulsory but there was no enforcement. So till now, it's compulsory, but it's not enforced. So what happened in 2003 was the waive of tuition fees back. So they don't have to pay tuition fees anymore. They don't have to pay any subscriptions payment. But they can still choose not to send to school, and there won't be any penalty for them.
You think there should be?
Sorry?
You think there should be?
I think there should be, yeah.
Okay.
Because that would be like the
I mean, it's-
optimal solution.
It seemed
to
like
all of this.
about a third of them didn't go, right?
Yeah, even with the free,
Right.
it did, the rate did increase, but it's still not at 100%. So the optimal solution will be to enforce that law, I think.
Right. When I go to African cities, oh, sorry, should I not ask?
It's all right, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's a quick question. None of you mentioned corrugated iron houses, more like in the informal settlements. But my question mainly for Lorene, is how do you finance these things? If you're going to fix up the houses in flooding areas, you're going to need stilts, you're going to need, who's going to finance this?
So thank you so much for your question. We are trying to engage all the stakeholders from the community, the government, the policy makers, so each of them has a certain role that they will contribute. And if we try to involve the government in this, they can try to subsidize construction of some of the resilient houses that we propose.
All right, so I have a couple of hands, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to get to all of you. So I'm going to go with lady in the with the scarf, and then a gentleman over here, and then a people.
Just piggybacking for the first presenter, just piggybacking off of his question that he asked you, did you look in your study about the reasons why the parents did not want to have their daughters go to school even though the policy was in place?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the data that I have is not allowed for that kind of analysis, but I have some idea about reasons why they would still not send their child to school, even though it's free now. And among them is the opportunity cost, because they want the child to be used for some other thing. If she is in school, she won't be able to do that. So, and also if they have the mindset that the expected return that they have from for education does not outweigh this opportunity cost, they will still not send the child to school, even though it's financially free now. So the financial costs have been eliminated, but the non-financial cost is still not there. So that might be a reason why they are still not educated.
Thank you. And who's here next?
Yeah, I have a comment for the first presenter and a question for the third presenter. My comment to the first presenter is thank you very much, because Henry, Oleomi, and I now have a practical example of strict dominance, so thank you for that. For the third presenter, I grew up, or spent a significant amount of time in New Orleans and went through Katrina and the aftermath and the whole thing about, we have this situation with all these people living in harm's way. We don't have the money to really move everybody out of harm's way. So the work that you're doing, is that focused on forward looking and saying where should we build in the future, or are you trying to look at how do we relocate people out of those places where they're heavily concentrated now and minimize future damage, knowing that we have climate change issues?
Because we have looked at the impact of trying to make people move from the current places that they live in, but in the long run you find most of them will tend to return to where they are, because that is where opportunities are, that is where what they are used to doing is, everything of theirs is. So we are trying to make them aware of the existing solutions that they can use to, maybe if they have a way, for example, in cases of flooding, to raise their foundations, or use a resilient material that can be able to withstand the hurricane or the earthquake. We are trying to find a way of getting that information known to them, to find a way of trying to use the existing strategies first before we can involve the government to try and help them maybe move to a closer area that they can still access the things they were accessing in their existing areas. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Wonderful. And then I'd like to get to you and then.
Good morning. My name is Elliot Faust. I'm in the meteorology department, and I have a follow-up question. I apologize, I didn't fully get your name. I think it's Lauren. Yes. Lauren, thank you for the talk. And as you're collecting data, especially about these neighborhoods, I'm curious to know if in a component of your research or with some of your collaborators have thought about or already have means of collecting data to aid the forecasting process, and what would that data look like?
Since it's the preliminary stages, we have not started on collecting data on forecasting. We are still trying to collect data to be able to analyze the underlying vulnerabilities. Then we will use aspects such as machine learning and AI to be able to predict using historic weather events to predict what the potential disasters are in the community that we have chosen. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for really awesome work that you are all doing. I guess my question is for all the presenters. I'd like to know, based on your experiences so far, what each of you are doing in your research. I want to know what your limitations are in terms of the methods you're using, if it means engaging with communities, the technologies you're using. I'll be interested to know what the limitations are.
So maybe I can start. Thank you for that question. I'll say my biggest limitation was the data. I don't know the detail of data. Because when I started with this research, the perfect data that I had in mind was following people through a generation, from one generation to another, and see exactly what is changing, like depending on parents' characteristics, parents being educated, what is changing, giving all the education expansion or education policies happening in Benin. How is it changing the distribution of education of people? But the data that I end up using has a lot of limitation, and I kind of use some argumentation to get away with those limitations, but it can be easily challenged. And so what I'm actually doing next from this project is kind of developing a model that will take into account those data limitations that I wouldn't have had to do if I had the good data. So yeah, I'll say the data was the biggest challenge.
All right, I'll go next. Thank you for the question. For my case and my research, I believe that one of the most challenging thing or limitation is like convincing stakeholders that 3D printing is a feasible technology. In Africa, most of the construction has like a lot of labor work, and if we start using 3D printers, we're going to decrease the manpower in the construction field, right? And they say what they usually say is we're not gonna have a lot of, so we're gonna have like the job opportunities will really decrease. So I have to convince the stakeholder that it's for good, but the 3D printing will bring another job opportunity of improving the community to be literate, and rather than using their physical labor, just using the technical knowledge and then using the computers, designing, modeling, and controlling the robots and the machines. So that's the challenge. Try to convince the stakeholder this is feasible, and then they have to change the policy of using a lot of manpower.
So thank you so much for your question. Our main challenge has been trying to find a way of making the technical information palatable to the community and the stakeholders. That is why we we figured that partnering with organizations and non-profit bodies that are working at the community level will help us to try and approach the community better and make them understand that the data that we are trying to collect with their help is for their own benefit and also to improve the resilience of their housing.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. So we have time for approximately one more question. Does anyone have another question? All right, so if no one else has questions, then please.
My question goes to Crystal, and thank you all for presenting such a wonderful work. I'm not sure if I heard it right. Did you mention that age 19 to 23 couldn't go to school at some point?
So age 19 to 28, they were too old to start primary school when the policy happened. So the education decision for the people in this age range already happened before the policy. So parents already decide whether they want to send those children to school or not before primary school became free.
So what I was thinking was the policy putting in place limitation to knowledge seeking, like age limited to knowledge seeking? Do we know that, or is this just a family choice?
So this is not really about the policy, it's rather about the average age at which parents usually send children to primary one in Benin. So the official age is 6 years old, but it happens especially in rural areas where they can send 8 years old or 7 years old in primary one, but it's really rare to see 9 years old and upward to start primary one. So that was the reason behind that cutting of 19 years old to 28 years old.
Okay, so it's basically based on the social norm. It's not has nothing to do with policy.
Yes, it's not about the policy, it's about what's usually happened even before the policy.
Because I know of a 60-year-old woman that started primary one. So. Thank you.
So that's very interesting. That sounds like a story for another day. But at this time, I'd like to thank you all so much for coming to the conference and for attending the oral presentations. We really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here and to support the people who are presenting. They put so much time and effort into making these presentations and practicing and everything else. So we really appreciate you supporting the work that they're doing. This gives them the courage to continue to do research.
We need to bear in mind that the land may not be as abundant as we think they may be. And that's one important consideration to have. Which takes me to the second point, which is an Africa-led and Africa-driven. I think that community development initiatives will need to empower those that are the recipients of that development to take ownership, greater ownership of that development efforts. I don't know of any country or any area that has been developed by outsiders. It is always locals that come together and in partnership with those coming from outside end up developing that area. And again, the example that I gave about that beans breeding earlier on, there have been a number of community development efforts. And when we think about the perspective from which they are being developed, right, if you look further down, when we started thinking about development, it had always been a Eurocentric approach of development. And after several decades, of community development approaches, if we are left with a number of Africans who feel less of a sense of pride in anything that is considered African. Because in their minds, development is becoming more and more like Europe and less of an African. So you look around and our young men are very enthusiastic to patronize the Premier League. And they feel so much attached and a sense of pride to be able to say, I'm a Man U supporter and buy their jerseys. I'm an Arsenal supporter, right? And then, but have no idea what kind of club that they have.